the history of New and Found goes back at least 20 years.
Okay.
And even longer than that, 40 years. And we relaunched as New and Found, almost corresponding with the launch of City Foundry. We're always going to resonate with projects that are going to be, I'm going to say community or neighborhood building. Those take quite a while. Seeing the potential, very different than realizing the potential. In that time, I had a really great opportunity to work with a real estate private equity firm in New York that focused on affordable housing, and then had an opportunity to work for a development firm in Chicago, and then felt like it was time to come back and work together with my dad. And then everything shut down. Right off the bat, we were in total emergency mode. I immediately became responsible for our hospitality real estate. So that stress created a new dynamic with my family. I want to be the best family member I can be. So I want to have a profound impact, positive impact on the community in which I'm in. And then third, I want to be a part of building an incredible company that blesses the individuals that are in the company and the customers that it serves. You can't control the world. There's a real benefit in challenging yourself.
Hey, Will, how you doing?
Good. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, so we'll get right into it. You're the founder of New and Found, which is a St. Louis-based development and investment firm. You guys have taken on tons of amazing projects. My favorites of which have been in the St. Louis market, and I know that's a dominant piece of your portfolio. And I think one of the most widely discussed projects of yours today has been the City Foundry and the impact that's had. But can you tell us a little bit more about, what your focus is at New and Found and, just the focus of the firm in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could be helpful to maybe rewind the clock a little bit. And you mentioned my role as president, and you mentioned founder. I think it might be more appropriate to say co-founder of version 2.
Yeah.
The history of New and Found goes back at least 20 years.
Okay.
And even longer than that, 40 years ago. So my dad, who's an architect, started the Lawrence Group about 40 years ago.
Okay.
And for the first part of his career, he was primarily an architect. And being an architect based in downtown St. Louis, he had a great opportunity to see some of the best kind of architectural core, I feel like, that a modern American city could have in what St. Louis has in its downtown buildings. And one thing led to another, and he ended up rehabbing a few buildings and finding success with that. And that kind of dovetailed into more of a development focus for him personally. About 20 years ago, that became a bit more serious, and he redeveloped the security building downtown, which is where the Lawrence Group's offices are based, and now where New and Found's offices are based, and several other buildings downtown. But I would say that it was a passion of him personally, and the business really had a nascent infrastructure. And so about 4 years ago, right before the launch of City Foundry, I joined that organization, and we relaunched as New and Found, almost corresponding with the launch of City Foundry. And in that period of time, from 4 years ago to today, we've really been trying to build off of the foundation that he started and create a development firm with a strong infrastructure to go after really difficult projects. And we talk all the time about realizing the potential.
Yeah.
That can go in lots of different ways, but certainly when you're in St. Louis and you're working in the city and you're working downtown, you can see a lot of potential. Realizing it is the really tricky part.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so interesting because it is if anybody from St. Louis is always talking about there's just so much potential down there. There's so much potential in the city. And you're right. It makes sense that your dad was in architecture and had kind of cut his teeth on what were probably some historic buildings in St. Louis, which comes with a lot more kind of checks and balances from the city. Because I know you guys have done some revitalization projects of the more historic architecture. So is that kind of what you mean in terms of realizing the potential of what already exists?
Yeah, so I think for the vast majority of developments that we've taken on, and to give you context of the magnitude, I'll say in our the longer history, the 20-year run, we have delivered and are under active development with, I'm going to say, over $800 million in development.
Yeah.
Now, looking back over the last 4 to 6 years, that number is more or less doubled. So a lot of that growth has happened in recent history. But for the vast majority of that 800 plus million, it's been adaptive reuse. It's been taking a building that is completely vacant. And when you take a building that's completely vacant, usually it's been vacant for a while. And that's more or less a reflection of the market doesn't know what to do with this, right? It has served its useful purpose, and now it's kind of dead, right? Yeah. It's a shell. And it takes a visionary. It takes someone that's creative. It takes someone that sometimes is a little bit crazy to think about what it could be in the future, and then put that deal together to make it happen. Because, I mean, ideas are a dime a dozen, right? Yeah. But getting it to the finish line, bringing all the different parties together to execute on that's really difficult. So going back, that's where, seeing the potential, very different than realizing the potential.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that because it's one of those things, like just talking to people in St. Louis or downtown here, everybody has an idea about, this property would be perfect for this, or, this. And then there's projects that get realized by developers, and then the general public in hindsight is like, oh man, he got so lucky. How do you find that deal? And it's like, well, that building sat vacant for 5 years and you did not go and touch it. Yeah. So
we welcome more developers to come downtown and risk capital with us.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And that is what is really inspiring about what you guys are doing at New and Found, is you really are like the boots on the ground in the city, taking risks. And I think, people don't always appreciate the risk that developers take on. I've done a couple interviews with some people who were working on projects in the city that were equally risky, and panned out in varying different ways. But yeah, it's funny. The general public sees the finished product and they're always like, yeah, he got lucky.
Yeah.
That is certainly not the case.
Sometimes we say we're a 20-year overnight success.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of the difficult times, and not to say that there aren't difficult times now. I mean, COVID and the pandemic, opening up a retail entertainment complex in a market that didn't have a retail or entertainment market.
Yeah.
Obviously, we didn't anticipate that was going to happen, but that was a real trial, I would say. And I think we've done a phenomenal job with what we had to do. I think the idea, sometimes you just have the exact right idea. And maybe that's a little bit of where you get lucky, because sometimes you don't have the right idea. It's hard to change halfway through, right? Yeah. But it definitely is not something that just kind of happens.
Yeah.
Oh, you just got lucky, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, kind of when you were, and I know the property that you're referring to, or the massive development, is the City Foundry. What was that project like? When did the plans first come to fruition, and what was that road like to getting it to where it is today? I mean, it looked like one Foundry Way. Was that your product as well?
The tower.
Yeah,
The apartment building. Yep.
It looks beautiful.
Thank you.
Construction looks like it's finally wrapping up.
That's right.
Yeah.
We're currently leasing to all those out there.
Oh, good.
And it's occupied. We have several tenants already. We've only been open for, I want to say, a little over a month. So, yeah.
I shop at Fresh Thyme
grocery
perfect. Store
Thank
every
you.
week, so I'm driving by that every day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, the story of Foundry really, in some ways, parallels my entrance into both real estate and, I'll say, the family business, and coming back to St. Louis. So I'm going to meander between a few different tracks here. 2015, I graduated from Georgia Tech in Atlanta, and had been living there for 4 years, right? And lived right in Midtown Atlanta, and seeing the growth in Atlanta and comparing that to what I was familiar with. I'd been coming to Midtown and downtown with my dad my whole life, so kind of seeing the track and the trajectory between Atlanta, going up, and St. Louis kind of stalling, really, in many ways, was frustrating, but also, I think for us, we're optimists, served as a bit of a rallying cry and an opportunity. And so in Atlanta, there were two projects that were being delivered right when I was graduating. And as I always did when my parents came down, I would take them to all the spots that I thought were really cool. And on my graduation day, I took them to a food hall in a neighborhood just outside of downtown Atlanta. The food hall was called Krog Street Market. And if you think about, for those that have been to Foundry and City Foundry, if you think about the size of the food hall at Foundry, maybe not the height in there, right, but the square footage, that's basically all of it, right? Yeah. It wasn't kind of everything else. It was just a food hall. And this had become kind of normal for me because I'd been living in a city that had dynamic spaces like that. But for my dad, he was like, oh my gosh, this is this dynamic, engaged, multi-generational, diverse space, not just the customers, but also the proprietors here as well. We have nothing like this in St. Louis, and we need to change that.
Yeah.
And so the idea kind of was born, I want to say May of 2015, when he was down visiting me. I had already had a job in Atlanta at that point in time. It was not in real estate, but he and I started dreaming about what this could be. So quickly after that, it was clear that what was the Federal Mogul Foundry plant, that was Foundry, was for sale at the time. It was currently under contract as well with another, I'll say, developer, and they had a plan that we didn't really like. It was to demolish the entire structure and do what I'm going to say is a more suburban style lifestyle strip mall there. Big sea of parking. And we reached out to the owners, learned that it, either right before or right after it fell out of contract, quickly got it under contract, I'm going to say at the end of 2015. And because of our history in, I'm going to say, complex, historic rehab projects, had enough confidence that we could clean the site, get the necessary tax credits, and put the project together. So between 2016 and 2019, we cleaned the site, kind of scraped the site and prepped it for construction. Closed on our construction loan in 2019, and we're planning to open in May of 2020. So bad timing.
Yeah.
We're, I'd say, 65% pre-leased the day before COVID, and then a couple weeks later, that number more or less halved, and we had to start over. And that was right about the time that I graduated. So I came back to St. Louis, and we hit reset a little bit at Foundry. We modified our food hall approach, and it was off to the races from there. So I can kind of go in many different directions from that. So
yeah, so that initial batch of tenants, was that strictly food vendors? Because I know now you have more retail space. There's a mini putt-putt facility in there. Were you strictly focused on food at first, or did you kind of have that retail concept in the works pre-COVID?
So we always thought there'd be a significant retail presence. I think, actually shifted more to entertainment than we thought.
Yeah.
So like where Museum of Illusions is,
Yeah.
that was originally envisioned as kind of more regional, national retail. Where City Winery was thought of as a retail space. So we've shifted probably more into food and entertainment than we originally thought. But we did have the property is broken out, I'll say, into thirds. So 1/3 is actually office, and our office is 100% leased. And we've actually had the most consistency in leasing the office, which little counter narrative to both downtown and whole return to office narrative, or work from home. But our office has been, I think, a growing strong point, and our rental rates are probably market high or near market high for the city of St. Louis. So that's 1/3. Second third, I'd say, is food and beverage and entertainment, and then the last third was envisioned as retail, and we've probably shifted more of that retail category into restaurant and entertainment.
Yeah. So you've got the grocery store, the Fresh Thyme right there.
Yeah.
Was that originally just going to be parking, or had that always been slated as like, let's put something here? When did the idea for a grocery store come in?
Grocery had always kind of been an idea to have. I mean, it's just a great anchor. We knew that SLU really wanted a grocer nearby, but we had a lot of conversations with different grocers, and Fresh Thyme ended up kind of coming to the table the fastest. And what was interesting is a bunch of different parties were initially not very interested, and then we signed with Fresh Thyme. We hadn't even announced it yet, and a couple of those other groups came back to us afterwards and were like, "Let's do this." And we said, "Well, we just signed a lease with Fresh Thyme." So so that was an early target, and gratefully through COVID, we were able to retain that. I think grocers also did pretty well during the pandemic. So we had several food and beverage concepts and entertainment concepts that went out. So before Putt Shack, that putt-putt concept you were mentioning, we had Punch Bowl Social. They filed bankruptcy. We had a lease with them. We were under construction on their space. They filed bankruptcy, and we had to find a tenant to refit the space out for. Alamo Draft House actually also went bankrupt, and so that tenant completely changed. We had a lease with corporate Alamo, and now the lease is with a franchise. So it's a completely different group, completely different organization, different ownership group. So it just happens to have the same sign, right?
Yeah.
We had an office tenant that went bankrupt, or didn't. I'm not sure if they went bankrupt, or they just couldn't fulfill their lease, and more than half the food hall fell out. where Gerard Craft's expat restaurant is.
Yeah.
That was actually the tenant that was slated to go there first, was the first lease we signed. There's a bit of irony there because first lease we signed that helped get Foundry to get to financing ends up being one of the last spaces that occupies because they fell out and we had to backfill them. So a bunch of our largest spaces were in need of being backfilled. So
yeah, that's interesting. That's a lot of shuffling, and I'm sure a lot of craziness going on during that time. So, you know, at this time when you're kind of getting the ball off the ground, what was your role looking like in terms of, like, were you the one who was out pursuing tenants for the properties? Was that your primary focus, or what were you doing in this whole
Yeah. So I'd say my role is ever changing. I think since I joined, I've really been I'd say the prime on building our organization. So when I joined, there were 5 or 6 of us on the team. We're a little more than double that now. So, and we fluctuated. It got higher. I think we were up to 20 people at one time. It's kind of shrunk down a little bit now, but I've been really point on identifying the skill sets and the capabilities that we need to acquire in some way, and then figuring out how to acquire it. And so that's been a large part of my role, has been trying to build the organization fast enough to fulfill the projects that we have in our pipeline or that we have currently underway. We initially started Foundry with a broker, and we ended up transitioning to kind of self-leasing it in part because we had a very specific vision for what we were looking for, and it felt like we could execute that a little bit better by controlling that part of the process completely. And we've continued to do that to this day. So I was not necessarily the one cold calling and reaching out. I would do that on occasion. I spend a lot of time in different parts of St. Louis trying food. I taste tested. I was a chief taste tester for all of the Foundry, the food hall tenants. And I would find a tenant that I would get excited about and float them to the team. But my role's kind of ever evolved over the last 4 years. And
I know you were talking about when you were graduating. Did you say Georgia Tech is where you went undergrad?
Yep.
I know you attended Wharton Business School at some point. When did you do that?
Yeah. So so Georgia Tech, studied engineering, kind of quickly realized I didn't want to be a professional engineer.
Yeah.
But I had always engaged with my dad with our businesses, right? Mm-hmm. It was an intellectually exciting part of our relationship growing up. And so I gravitated towards this kind of strategy consulting groups and private equity and investment. And so after undergrad, I worked for a company called Bain, and in their Atlanta office, national kind of consulting firm. I spent most of my time with them in their private equity advisory group. So a lot of underwriting and modeling and kind of developing strategies, like not necessarily me. I mean, I did a lot of underwriting, a lot of modeling, but the team and developing strategies and kind of had a front seat view to executives and investors and how do they think about markets and companies and industries, and had a really wonderful, grueling but wonderful experience with that. And this was all in parallel, as I mentioned, as like Foundry is coming online. So it's 2015. I'm now, working at Bain, and Foundry is starting to, go through the process of pre-development. And so during the day, during the 12-hour days I'd be focused there, and then I'd try to call my dad in the 30-minute drive home and check in. What happened today? What are you guys thinking about? What are you working on? And I just kind of realized through that process that I really loved what he was working on. I really enjoyed the both the impact that you could have being successful there, as well as just the intellectual exercise, if you will, of development. So I started imagining a path in which I could come back around to St. Louis, collaborate, work with my dad in some way. And that path I thought would be best if I got a little bit more experience. So I ended up going to Penn for graduate school. I started in their design school.
Interesting.
So I started in a city planning master's degree at Penn, and then got into Wharton as well.
Yeah.
And did a dual master's in design with city planning and an MBA from Wharton. And I like to say the planning degree taught me what to build.
Yeah.
And the business degree taught me how to finance it. Right.
Yeah.
So it's this like dual mentality. And during that time, I had a really great opportunity to work with a private equity investment, real estate private equity firm in New York that focused on affordable housing and preserving affordable housing. They had a fascinating strategy, and I worked with them for a little bit of time during school, and got to see another type of real estate, and then had an opportunity to work for a development firm in Chicago that was working on mega projects, 4, 5, 6 times bigger than Foundry.
Yeah.
And got exposed to just kind of how a very professional, large-scale developer was built and operated, and had those 2 great experiences, and then felt like it was time to come back and work together with my dad.
Yeah. Wow. That road makes a lot of sense to me, looking back at it. Makes sense that you had the city planning degree, because I always think about that from a developer perspective. It's hard. It's a lot harder than people think. Like, obviously seeing City Foundry now, it's like, oh, this was so obvious. But when you're looking at a site or a building that needs to get rehabbed, something like that, and you're trying to reimagine it, especially when you're repurposing it. It's one thing to go in and there's apartments there and you're just making them better apartments. But to go in and completely reimagine a space or a lot takes a lot more creativity, is for sure, but also experience and exposure to other projects. Because, obviously that food hall you were sitting in Atlanta was kind of a spark. But I'm sure, acting in New York and Chicago and getting exposed to how those markets were thinking and functioning was also pretty pivotal in shaping how you look at real estate. So then when did you make the move back to St. Louis officially and kind of join the team full time?
So I moved back to St. Louis basically the final spring break of my final year. So that was March of 2020.
Wow,
right?
Great time.
Yeah, great timing. So I moved back, and we had delivered the Angad Arts Hotel a little bit more than a year prior to that point in time. And I was staying in the hotel just because my parents didn't necessarily have room for me at home. But I was staying in the hotel while I was home, and then everything shut down And it was a really interesting time because I had half a semester left of school, and I was living in a hotel, and then kind of right off the bat, we were in, total emergency mode. So I ended up dropping a bunch of classes in my final semester because I almost became a full-time employee at that point in time, helping out, helping manage the fallout, especially within the hotel and a few other, I'm going to say, hospitality-oriented real estate that we have, because it was a little chaotic, right? The market just evaporated overnight. And there were a lot of lessons learned, and it was really difficult. I mean, one of the roles that I had to do was I had to assist I sat in a bunch of layoff meetings, not just like sitting in it with my dad. I immediately became responsible for our hospitality real estate.
Yeah.
And had to work through how long can we keep all these employees? What's the plan? Can we wait until the government kind of establishes the program to where people can be employed? Right. I mean, really, really difficult time. That was my entrance into the business.
Yeah.
My first 3 months were really, really tough. Wasn't working on anything real estate. It was like purely triage hospitality businesses in our hospitality real estate. So when I don't even know if I was official at that point. I was just here, and I was an extra hand, and I was able to help. I officially started after I graduated, which was kind of in May. As I mentioned, I dropped a ton of classes. So when it came May time to graduate, I actually didn't have enough credits to graduate. I was like, oh my gosh, I've just taken all these loans and paid for this incredible degree, and I don't even have enough credits to graduate now because I had to drop a ton when the pandemic hit. So I was able to work out with one of my professors to basically do an independent study directly with him and use our business and kind of what the vision that we were building as a case study and lay out a roadmap for our growth plan. Yeah. And I did that through the summer, so I extended kind of what I was doing, but it was an interesting start.
Wow. So you did get the degree.
I have the degree.
That's
impressive. I have the degree. It was a little bit of a stop and start ending to it, or touch and go, but I have the degree.
Yeah. That's impressive. Because, it's like, I mean, where are you going? Like, you're going to the school to prepare for this.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now, too, you're getting information that's going to be very valuable to the school because you're facing unprecedented events. Yeah. As like your first role.
Yeah. I think the like thesis of it was something like, building it was around building a business for long-term growth when you're in the middle of this global pandemic.
Yeah. Wow.
So.
Well, and during that time, I can only imagine, especially during the layoff meetings, the stress that you're probably under and probably the pushback. You're probably dealing with a lot of anger and frustration from the, employees and conversations that you're having. Were you doing anything at that, like, what were you doing in your own time to keep yourself sane? Were there any practices that you had that helped keep you sane?
What did I do? There was that point in time was really a blur. I mean, I've been blessed with a phenomenal family and support system there, and I'm deeply grateful for the relationship that I have with my dad because family businesses are really strange arrangements for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, there's this automatic viewpoint from someone, anyone, everyone, I mean, that you don't deserve the position, the role that you're now in, right? There's also this dynamic around you have a dual role with your boss. You have what you want to be like a very healthy relationship with a parent.
Yeah.
And then you also have this dynamic of this is your boss. And sometimes you may complain to your parent about your boss,
Yeah.
and vent to your parent about your boss. When they become the same person,
Yeah.
that becomes a really difficult dynamic. And so I know that, I mean, my professional career to that point had been, I'd say, entry level and late, I wasn't very advanced in my career. Like I hadn't made it to middle management or anything. And so the whole prospect of terminating employees, and I mean, I knew that would happen eventually. I didn't think it'd happen on day one. Right. So
Yeah.
processing kind of all of these ideas. And when I had originally agreed to come back home, I had all these like grand visions of what we were going to accomplish together. And for the first 2.5 years, it was in the trenches, focused on one foot in front of the other, and a lot of stress along the way. And so that stress created a new dynamic with my family.
Yeah.
And to bring it back, I'm incredibly blessed to have a family that could deal with me
Right.
when I was processing a lot of difficult emotions and scenarios. So that I just have to say has been a really important part of my life. You got to have other outlets too.
Yeah.
Working out, friends. Gratefully, I had components of Foundry that were really enjoyable. I mean, if you have a solid purpose for why you're doing everything, I mean, and mine was, I really want to help and support and the community of St. Louis, and having that kind of North Star, if you will, can help you get through the really tough times. And so, did a lot of taste testing. That was fun.
Yeah.
I gained some weight there, but that's fine. I met my wife. I got married 7 months ago.
Wow. Congratulations.
And met my wife during that time. So
Yeah.
she's been a tremendous support. So
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was that was gonna be my next question. Was your wife with you at the time?
yeah. Yeah.
And so did you start dating while you were living at the hotel?
No, it was, but it wasn't much long after. We
Yeah.
met in I'm gonna say late 2020.
Yeah.
And started dating pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that is such a beneficial component relationship
Oh, yeah.
to have. I work with my mom as well.
Yeah.
And it is so funny when you're like working with a parent. It is funny because there's only so much you can say.
Yeah.
And having a spouse. So I'm engaged. We're getting married.
Oh,
in June.
congratulations.
Thank you. And so having like that spouse it's just really nice to have somebody to talk to. And the nice thing about Courtney, my fiance, is that she's pretty good at remaining objective and holding me like accountable to like my words and keeping my thought process like kind of a little more straight and narrow. Like
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's easy to go down these rabbit holes and things, and it's nice to have a partner that kind of pulls you out of those or just prevents you from even steering in the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Tori's been that for me.
And I also know from my experience too, because I'm working with my mom, it's also fun to talk to my dad, because now you start to see your parent in this whole new light. Like I think once you turn like 22 or so, you start realizing like my parents are humans, maybe even like high school.
Yeah,
You start figuring
at
it
some
out.
point.
Yeah, it's like, these are human beings. And when you start working with them, you really start realizing like, oh yeah, they're a human being. They gave birth to me however many years ago when I was in this same position, and now I've just been a part of their life ever since. And
Yeah.
it's I feel like with my dad and it's strengthened. It's been a funny strengthening in our relationship too, because we can both like relate to my mom as a human being.
Yeah.
And the same thing with now working with my mom. It's been like it's built our relationship because it's like, oh, we're in this together.
Yeah.
And it's more we're more so working as equals now toward a common goal as opposed to just being a dependent.
Yeah. Do you agree on everything? Or not? I mean, not. I'm assuming you don't agree on everything, but do you agree on most things, or do you have that kind of like, I want to go right, you want to go left?
I would say, I would say we do agree on most things, but there are certain things where, like early on, I know. So it's 5 of us on a team, and they have like a particular vision of this is like the way the business is run in terms of like minimal marketing, like all word of mouth kind of thing, which is something that I've benefited from because I think a lot of young agents get into the business and they're like overly hungry right away or like really pushy and salesy.
Yeah.
And so the biggest thing I gained, I think, and learned from them is like, A, like the long-term approach, and B, just like, I hate even using the word like classy, but almost running a business with like that sense of class. But I also kind of like to push things a little bit. I like a little more of like the modern, like the social media and all that kind of stuff. And I think there was a little, not even really spoken to me, but a little in the back of the head, like take it easy a little bit. So then I just had to like put some stuff under my name and just start putting it out like, all right, this isn't representing the group. It's just representing me.
Yeah.
And now a lot of that stuff is getting tied in with the group more because I've professionalized it a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always a bit of a conflict between this is the way we do things and your ideas for, well, I think there's some better ways to do things. There's some new ways to do things, or just based off of personalities, what you think can work versus what the older generation thinks can work. And it's nice to be able to have the autonomy, maybe not total autonomy, but autonomy in something that you can. I mean, I'm guessing this podcast, I mean, this is you.
Right?
This isn't the broader kind of entity, but I'm sure it's been an incredible experience to kind of roll out and do on your own.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how about you and your dad? Do you guys get along on most things, or what was that like in the beginning?
Yeah. So it's been a really fascinating journey for us. I would say that we have consistently had alignment around the destination, like where we want to get to, where we would disagree, and that disagreement could be just like, I just don't think that's the best way to go, all the way to you are wrong.
Yeah.
You know, like I completely disagree with you, and you know, it's the spectrum of intensity, right? Would be on the path, the way in which we get there, and I'm glad we had at least alignment on the destination. I think that just part of one's professional development, or at least for me, I think I'm finding how I want to manage and compartmentalize a lot of different, I would say emotions, but the different dynamics that we just go through, right? There's the project. I mean, there's $110 million loan on Foundry, and that someone has to personally guarantee that, and that's my family.
Right.
So, I mean, like, when Foundry loses half of its tenants, it's a little bit like, oh shit, and there becomes this like tunnel vision to how do we solve this problem, right? And I don't, if I'm not dealing directly with that, I might be like, well, no, we can't lose sight of everything else, right? So the stressors, figuring out how to deal with stress in a more productive way has been really critical to just my relationship. I'd say not even just with him, but my relationship with everybody. Because when you get in a position too where you're leading people and they're looking to you to get a sense of like, how are we doing? Where are we headed? You can't kind of be in the same mentality of like, a bunch of coworkers kind of hanging out bitching about the boss, right?
Yeah.
So, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm not supposed to swear on this. But
no, you're totally fine.
Yeah. So that's been an evolution. I think there are certainly still things that I disagree on, but I feel like our relationship has improved as it's been more, and it kind of goes to what you said about class, right? Like classing it up. It's less around the disagreement around the content, but I think more around how do you take that disagreement on content and direction? How do you communicate it more effectively?
Yeah.
I think the ways in which we communicate, the ways in which we think about how we treat one another is so important. How we treat relationships. You can disagree. You can think the other person doesn't have a clue what they're doing, but the way in which you treat them and the way in which you try to communicate that, I think that's far more important than the actual content of the disagreement. And the more open-minded that I feel like I've become, the more open-minded I feel like others are to my ideas and what I have to share. There's definitely a dynamic when you come out of school, whether that's undergrad or grad school or whatever, that like, I've made it.
Yeah.
I have the answer. Just listen to me.
Yeah.
And I've had to tone that down. So yeah.
You realize how hard stuff is and how much time stuff takes.
Yeah.
That was the big realization for me. It's like, oh, wow, a lot of things take a long time.
They do. I mean, Foundry, we're in year 9.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So.
That is crazy to think about. It's almost 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, and it is cool, like what you were saying too, with like your family's name being on the debt that's owed. I do feel like, yeah, when you're getting into business with a parent, yeah, and you can't just like talk about the boss behind their back kind of thing. You instantly take on like this degree of ownership, and like you kind of have to go all in when you're joining the family business. I feel like when you're if you were taking on a role at another company where it's not like your family, there's a little less stake, or a little less when you're joining that job or taking on a role. It's kind of like getting married. It's like when you're taking on this role, you feel like, okay, there's this higher degree of commitment because now my name's on it. Whereas like when you're taking on a job, just another job, even if it's a very important role, there's a little more of like in the back of your head, you're like, okay, well, at the end of the day, if I hate it, I can just quit and kind of cut and run. I feel like when you're joining like your parent, you're like, well, I'm bought in.
Yeah.
And like there's no turning back now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do think that mindset is a lot different than when I was younger, and I think it lends itself to marriage and those deeper relationships as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's not it's not the same kind of agreement that I feel like employer employee generally has. Like the traditional is like I'm here to provide my labor, my intelligence and effort in exchange for certainly compensation, but appreciation and whatnot. And when you're in a family, there's certainly still the elements there, but there's also this, I feel like, element around I'm here to support our family, right? I'm here to at least that's how it is for me. I'm here to do everything I can to support our family, and as a broader, to broaden that a little bit more, to support the foundation and the efforts that you've already built and continue that beyond, you. At least that's how I've thought about it. So.
Yeah. And another thing I like that you brought up too is like when you're moving into like work with your father, and the viewpoint of the general public and everybody is like, you don't deserve what you have. That kind of sentiment that some people
Nepo
project.
baby.
Yeah, exactly. and what a lot of people don't account for, and which is a reason why a lot of people don't join their family businesses. Like I know so many kids where I'm like, it looks like your dad's doing something pretty good. You could always join on with him, but there's a degree of like, I want to prove that I can do my own thing. Or it's almost like as a developer where you're taking on all this risk, and then in hindsight everybody's like he's a genius. It's like when you're joining your dad, you're joining a pre-established company. There are some assets there. There's a little momentum, and there's also a little risk. So they're like, and what's really admirable about you is how serious you really took that role from day one joining, because you really didn't have an option. It was right at that point where it's somewhat sustainable, but we're taking on so much risk that it could also all come crashing down. And yeah, I'm just kind of reiterating the point that people are going to be like, oh yeah, how lucky he was to get that opportunity, but really, the amount of risk that you're taking on personally and then even socially, it's like, because then it's like, what if this fails? You could have isolated yourself from the situation and been like, and it doesn't work out, and then it's no big deal.
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh man, he came in, he was second generation, and he completely messed it up. So
you're describing my nightmare right now. Thank you for that. No, I think one of the things that I've witnessed with my dad that I think he's so good at is managing his own stressors. Like I've rarely seen him stressed, and in the conversations we've had with each other, he's acknowledged like, yeah, I have stress, but he manages it really, really well, and in a healthy way too, not in a way of it's like, oh, he's a pressure cooker about to to blow up, but I feel like at times I'm an external processor, and so if I'm stressed, it's like everyone's going to know I'm stressed, right?
Yeah.
And that I don't think is very productive or helpful, and almost sometimes it builds on itself. So I think part of my journey in figuring out how to be most effective in my role as the leader of this organization, my role as the son of the founder in the business, the role of just being a more effective leader in general, has required me to find, I'd say, a confidence, not arrogance, shifting from from an arrogance of like, I've accomplished all these things, like I have these accolades, I have these credentials, like I have the right answer. It's less around, in many ways, I'm like, I don't actually think I necessarily have the right answer.
Yeah.
Confidence more around like, I will be okay, right? I will be okay. We will be okay. I believe in what we're doing. I'm surrounded by phenomenal people. I trust them. I trust their ability to help us move forward. And I don't agree necessarily with everything that our team does, but I trust that they're smart. I trust that their head's in the right place. We all are aligned in where we're trying to go. And in that same way that I'm trying to trust my team, I'm trying to think about how my dad and my relationship is, right, as well. I'm thinking back now, like, what was the question? But I'll just keep going. I think that for me, the confidence is a really powerful shield to people that think that like you don't belong or you didn't deserve this or whatnot. I mean, I can remember some time ago in a time when I was under an immense amount of stress. I was even like, oh man, is this really the right place for me? Like, did I make the wrong call? It's just like, I'm not where I want to be necessarily in my life in different ways. Did I make a mistake? Right. And in that period of time, I don't think I was a pleasant person necessarily to be around either. And I was really I was worried a lot about how people thought of me and, am I losing confidence? Am I losing the confidence of people in the organization? And I think that I had to go back to a place of, so I kind of identified 3 things that I felt were really, really important to me. The first was, I want to be the best family member I can be. So I want to be the best son I can be to both my parents. I have 3 siblings. I want to be the best sibling I can be. I want to be, and at the time I wasn't necessarily married, so I want to be the best boyfriend, partner, and now the best husband, and I hope the best father I can be when that happens. That's number 1. Then number 2 is I want to have a profound impact, positive impact on the community in which I'm in, right? And then third, I want to be a part of building an incredible company, helping build, like not necessarily me, the builder, right? But helping build an incredible company that that blesses the individuals that are in the company and the customers that it serves. And if I like someone asked me like, well, what are your goals? Like, you're so upset. What are your goals? And I was like, these are my goals. And when I was thinking about it, I was like, I've been able to do all of that, right? Like working with my father, our relationship has changed, it's evolved, but it's become better. And the relationship I have with everyone in my family and my life has been, I think I've been able to say, yes, I've been the best that I can be in those relationships. I feel like my role and being here has helped City Foundry become more successful and several of our city projects become more successful. And so, translating that has helped St. Louis become a better place to live. And I think our company is better. I think our company is healthier. So it's like, what am I all worked up about? And that was a really important shift for me, because that shift, I think since that shift, it's been a much better place entirely. And my ability to kind of withstand the stresses, it's just kind of like, I'm doing what I need to do and I'll be okay. And so, I think we started talking about like the whole premise of people thinking you don't deserve where you are, and maybe not, but I'm doing what I want to do. Right. I'm doing what I'm trying to accomplish, and I don't care.
I love that you touched on those 3 most important things for you. And I like too that I like that you use the word best. For whatever reason, I use that same word too. And I like it because it requires you in any situation to revert back to first principles and just have a trajectory or an aim at best. It's not like a particular like numerical metric or it's immeasurable to a degree, but I've in my career and relationships, when I can just focus on this is the decision I need to make in this instant, and having the framework of being the best, family member, being the best spouse, being the best agent or investor kind of thing. What would they do in this situation? And then when you face particularly hard, challenging events, you're like, well, the best would be able to figure this out.
Right.
So then for me, it helps reduce overwhelm dramatically, because then you're not overwhelmed by the situation. You're like, well, this is what I asked for. I want to be the best. And if you look back at history, the best would have been able to solve this problem. So what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And then if you get the problem wrong, you're like, oh, I know which way not to solve it.
Right.
Well, I guess, and we're still alive today,
Yeah.
so we've got another shot at the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that frame of mind of we're going to be okay is so powerful too. It's like, well, I'm living.
Yeah.
Here I am, one more day.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
hopefully it doesn't, all come crashing down today. But if it does, hopefully we get another chance tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. My wife and my experience growing up was very, very different. From many of the blessings that I had, she didn't have. And that's given me tremendous context and help to just, think about how grateful I am for everything that I have. But also, if I don't have everything that I thought I had, I'd also be okay.
Right.
It's fear of loss. There's like all these psychology studies around, the excitement around what you can gain. Let's say, $1,000. Right. You have the opportunity to win $1,000. You have the opportunity or the potential to lose $1,000. That excitement about gaining $1,000 pales in comparison to the fear of losing $1,000. Right.
Interesting.
And the fear of loss is such a powerful emotion, and being able to, there's a healthy element there, right? Like, don't go out and bet the farm, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why it's there, but I think the ability to control that, to be a little bit more rational about it. It's not rational to bet the farm either, but it's also not rational to say, I'm going to take a calculated risk and I'm completely paralyzed by a fear of any kind of loss at all. And so that ability to manage that, I think is a superpower, or just a really beneficial skill. So,
yeah. I think that fear emotion it's such an important emotion to talk about, because it's often so irrational.
Yeah.
I know, you look at the biological experience that happens when fear ensues, and you can have physical reactions to maybe losing $1,000 or the fear of losing $1,000 that are similar reactions to you're in a life-threatening event.
Yeah, fight or flight, right?
Yeah. And and that can cause you to outbursts and all these kinds of things. That's been such an emotion that I've tried to focus on like the last 4 years. And have there been any? So one thing that I try to do is I'll try to take on hard stuff to make other things feel less hard. Is that, if that makes sense? So I do these morning. It's kind of like if you've ever heard of Andrew Huberman. He's all about those biological systems and the cold plunges and all these, exposing yourself to these things that.
Oh, I did 75 hard.
Did you? Yeah. Okay, I did that too.
You wouldn't be able to tell now. That was 2 years ago, but I like the there's there's a real benefit in challenging yourself.
Yeah.
Right. I walked on the football team at Georgia Tech, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Division I program. Didn't think I'd be playing football in college, and they had an open tryout, and I tried out, and I made the team, which
No
was
way.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. But it was really hard.
Yeah.
Like, and I was my coach at our senior our senior banquet at the very end was like, yeah, when Will showed up, I didn't think he'd make it because I thought he'd get destroyed.
Yeah.
I was smaller, and I was wide receiver, and I just got wrecked by these future NFL DBs and middle linebackers and everything. And it was really, really hard. And I quit. I quit my junior year. I quit for 10 hours. I called my coach, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. Yeah. I'm just destroyed, and this is miserable. And in the 10-hour span, I was like, no, I can't not see this through. I have to see it through. Yeah. I called him back, and I was like, just forget everything.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I didn't leave. I was actually just down there for the Georgia Tech Miami game, which we won, and that was the big upset for Miami. And we were down there on the 10-year reunion of our Orange Bowl win in our senior year.
Yeah.
So, great finish to that experience. And it lets you know you can get through this.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think is the point you were making. You challenge yourself, you take something on that you maybe aren't even sure you're ready for.
Yeah.
And just the process of seeing what you're capable of achieving kind of pushes you to it pushes you back to the fear to not be afraid, right? To not be afraid of the other things that might be going on in your life. So
that's really cool you say that. And for me, it was interesting because I felt so I did 75 hard a few years ago too, and I run it back all the time. I'll probably do another one January 1st or something.
Yeah. You let me know. I can. Yeah. That helped me.
Yeah. We can run on it together. But that was a really, really life-changing experience for me. I felt in terms of seeing things through to the end.
Yeah.
I was talking to Greg Gleicher on my last podcast.
Oh, nice.
Great
guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And I was talking to him because he's kind of has, he triple majored at WashU, played college baseball there. And it sounded like as a kid, he kind of had that perseverance gene. And I growing up, I think I did have a degree. I had grit. So I was willing to fight in the moment and always very gritty. But I think in terms of, I feel like I'm really gaining that perseverance gene now. I played AAA hockey all growing up, and looking back on it, I think I probably hung up the skates a little too soon. I think there was probably a little left in the tank, but I was so used to being good as a kid growing up that I hadn't, because I was the youngest of 5, just from kindergarten on, I was just good at sports, and I don't feel like I developed that skill of getting better.
Yeah.
I was just I'm good. And then all of a sudden kids were better, and it was I don't know how to get better. Yeah. And it's a skill that I've built up now. When you're looking back at childhood, and obviously if you're walking onto the football team, is that kind of a skill that you feel like you've always benefited from, or was it something that you built over the years?
So I think, I was, as you were talking about, you're being good at something, and at some point realizing you're not the best at this.
Yeah.
Right. And that realization can be disruptive.
Yeah.
Right. You can. A lot of times, and I'd put myself in this category, you can be well, I don't want to do things I'm not good at, right? Or I don't want to do things that I'm not better than most people at.
Yeah.
Right? It's a little bit of a self-selection in what you're good at. Not everyone has that option to just change what they're doing into something that they're better at. But growing up, certainly when you're growing up, you don't have a ton of responsibilities. You have that option, right? I was thinking to the Georgia Tech experience, I knew I wasn't very good. So it's probably a little bit different. Like I knew going into this that my role is going to be on this team is to do the best that I can as effectively a scout team player, right?
Yeah.
To help the team get better and be a part, be as effective as it can be. So that was one where I think my expectations and my reality were pretty much aligned. I think the trick is when your expectations and reality are off, you have this expectation that you're really, really good. In reality, you realize you're not as good as you think. And that perseverance there is how do you, well, one, there may be a very valid reason for you to just not do it anymore, right? Depending on how not good you are, right? Especially if you're talking about your career, like you don't want to do something, you're not good, you're not going to have career growth and all that. But there's also your capacity to grow, right? Your capacity to become better and to become much better at what it is you may not be good at. I think that's the element of perseverance that's really, really important is, and that's the point of competition too, right? You learn you're not as good as you think. And sometimes there's that energizing to be like, well, I can become better and I want to become better at this. I'm trying to think of, the different experiences growing up, if there's anything that stands out for like developing that kind of skill. But, it goes back to, what you were saying about being the best, right?
Yeah.
That intangible, unquantifiable, rarely are you going to have a scenario where you can actually, someone will point at you and be like, you are the objective best at this.
Yeah.
Right. Unless you win a national championship and something,
And
right?
You're the best for one day.
You're the best for one day. Exactly. But it's that thing that if that's your goal, you can always work towards it. Right. You can I think that's just something growing up. That was a value that was instilled in me, is to be the best. It was always though framed. It's not about being the best in terms of like it was inward. It was it was comparing me to myself, right?
Yeah.
Not me to necessarily everybody else. Like, am I doing everything I can do to be the best? Not am I constantly comparing myself to others.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's such a valuable frame of mind to just deal with yourself from the day before.
Yeah.
Am I just getting a little bit better?
Yeah.
And I think too what you identified when you were like talking about the Georgia football experience is identifying your role and being the best at your role.
Right.
I coach hockey now, and
nice.
I played hockey before, and I always remember the coaches like talking about like, you've got a role on this team or whatever, and it's all right, well, I still want to score goals.
Yeah.
And now you get to the other side of it, and when you're looking at it as a coach, you're trying to tell these the players where their roles are. So that's something that I'm trying to get a lot better at, is helping players identify their own role and becoming the best at serving that role.
Right.
I think, like growing up, I was like, well, it's going to be the person who scores the most goals is going to be on the first line, which they will, but there will also be the person who's best at passing. There's also going to be the body who just throws hits out there and gets the team riled up.
Yeah.
Those guys are, if you're the best at anything, you're going to have a spot in the lineup. And I think that's, it's been a maturing process to figure out those things. And like when you were talking about those three components that you want to be the best at, those are all roles that you're serving today. And so you can aim toward best in each of those capacities. I think what some young people will do in their career, and when I was like kind of, I guess, goal reflecting, I think that was something inspired by 75 Hard or something early on.
Yeah.
Like I remember like writing down a list, and it was like all these like goals that were so far out there, which I think is good to have, but it's also good to then, okay, write down what are you doing today and how can you just get better at that.
Yeah.
And then realize that those other goals might be 20 years out, but just being the best at what you're doing today is gonna get you there.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be one step at a time, but you'll get there.
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now called Slow Productivity, and it's interesting because I feel like my experience thus far has been a lot around like optimizing productivity, and this is kind of making a case counter to that, but it kind of goes back to that point around the setting of goals and sometimes like creating these like major overarching goals that you're working on and then backtracking everything that you're trying to do to achieve those. That can be effective, but it can also really be around where you are today and the first principles element of like, okay, I have these goals, but who do I want to be, right? And how am I living my life in alignment with who I want to be, which is, the being the best at X is both a goal, but it's also kind of an identity, right? And if you're thinking like, I want to be the best leader, right? That's almost like an identity element. So when you align your behavior with that identity, it's a little bit different than, I think it can be more effective than like this like goal as well.
Right.
So, although as I'm saying all this, I'll perhaps contradict myself by saying I also don't know that I'm particularly good at any any of these things that I'm working on right now, but I think I can be better if this is how I approach it in my thought process. So, yeah.
And you're getting better. And you're good. Yeah. I think getting better is a sign of being good, and having the humility to admit that you need to get better every day is a sign of being good.
Yeah.
My dad actually, he'll say that to me. Like sometimes I'm stressed about whether I'm doing the right thing or being the best I can be in a certain situation, and he'll always remind me. He's like, the fact that you're talking to me about this and the fact that you care is enough. He's like, it shows that you're on the right trajectory. So just have faith in the process, kind of thing. Are there any lessons so obviously you were talking about that book that you're reading now. Are there any books? So I guess it's kind of twofold question. I guess from your father, or are there any inspiring quotes or books that have been particularly impactful in helping you create the mindset that you have today?
I've become a bit of a student of classical Stoicism. So Ryan Holiday.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah. That's been a really positive influence on me. Marcus Aurelius, his Meditations is the one, if you think of an author, he's an ancient author. One of the quotes that, and I'm going to blank on exactly what source of text and the exact phrasing of the quote, but it's within that, the library of Stoicism, if you will, is don't be heard complaining even by yourself.
Yeah.
And that again, there's these moments where you really can point to where there's something that you kind of learn, and then after you've learned it, everything changes, right? And hearing that was so profound for me, because you can't control the world, right? You can't control everything that's going to come at you. I have these grand visions for what we can accomplish with our organization. I mean, if inflation totally takes off, in the next 4 years and interest rates skyrocket and whatever, and all of a sudden we're sitting underwater, and and the trajectory of the city doesn't go in the right direction. I mean, there's all these scenarios of of pain.
Yeah.
You can't do anything about that, right?
Yeah.
Can't do anything. What you can do is think about how you're going to respond to that. You can think about, like, am I going to live with a pessimistic mindset? Am I going to live, where woe is me, everything is terrible? Or are you going to live with a mindset that is, I am going to do everything I can to make tomorrow better than today, or today better than yesterday? You can't always do that, right? You're going to have ups and downs. You got to give yourself enough grace to know that you're going to have off days, you're going to have down days, you're going to be frustrated and everything. But going back to that, and just like as a reminder, let's just like, there's no positive here. There's no, this doesn't make my life better. This doesn't make the person that's listening to me's life better. So why waste my time on it? So that's, and since that point, I just feel like a load has been lifted, and there's actually been, from a macroeconomic environment, there's at times been even a worse, more stressful scenario, but it's conditioned me to, I feel like, handle that so much better. Yeah. So
I love that. Don't be heard complaining, not even to yourself.
Or yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah, by yourself.
By yourself.
Yeah.
It's that's a really good reminder.
Yeah.
Because I go through waves of like listening and reading different things, but it's been a minute since I was into the Stoics, probably 8 months or so.
Yeah.
And when I hear those quotes, it's grounding again. And when you get out of that frame of mind it's easy. It's a muscle, and you have to work it out because it's easy to lose it.
Absolutely.
I've kind of like simplified that one a little bit, but I do remember hearing that to just, now what? Yeah. It's like, okay, shit hit the fan, now what? What are you going to do now? I mean, because this isn't getting you anywhere. Yeah. Yeah. It's that degree of like ownership that you have to take over it. It's, yeah, I really like that quote. He also, I know Ryan Holiday talks a lot about progress, not perfection, is a big thing he emphasizes as well. Because he's like Marcus Aurelius Part 2. He just he does a great job of explaining it.
Yeah, he does. It's super accessible, and I feel like it's Obstacle is the Way is probably one of his books that's like my most recommended.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm gonna put that on my Christmas list. Courtney was just asking me what books I want for Christmas.
Yeah, I couldn't recommend that more. There's others that I'm reading as like Virtue series right now as well, but Obstacle is the Way it's just an acknowledgement. Like, everyone in history has dealt with challenges, right? And yesterday within our organization, I heard one of our leaders talk about, like, we should not be seeing things as problems and challenges, but potential and opportunity. Yeah. And it's just like, again, you're talking about the same thing, right? But it's just your approach to that opens up so many more paths that you can go down that in large part are probably more productive.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I love it. This has been a very fun conversation.
Likewise.
Yeah. So I guess, having covered what we have so far, and we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but what's your vision for New and Found moving forward? What kind of projects do you want to look at? I know you're concentrated pretty highly in St. Louis right now. Do you have plans of expanding beyond that, or what do you guys kind of have on the agenda?
Yeah. So in the last 4 years, we've started doing development outside of St. Louis. We've done several medical office buildings in Oklahoma, and we're looking at a few different markets. Healthcare is one that we really want to focus on, and I would say more broadly institutional. So our design practice has a very long history with healthcare and higher ed, and I'd say institutional corporate, and we see that as a great opportunity as well. We're always going to resonate with projects that are going to be, I'm going to say, community or neighborhood building. Those take quite a while because you're putting a lot of different pieces together, and the ingredients kind of all have to be there, including, does the community want it? Right? And getting that input from both the political leaders and the I'd say the municipal bureaucracy, local neighborhood groups, and generally speaking, you're going to have, someone's going to be complaining to you. So those just take longer. So, we're always going to resonate towards those, but we, strategically we have to balance it. So, yeah.
So the medical and institutional can be a little more streamlined.
Yeah.
You know who your client you're serving, there's a need and it needs to get developed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have visions of like vertically integrating, construction arm or anything like that? Or do you like working with contractors and kind of keeping that separate?
Yeah. I'd say we have these affiliated businesses and they're phenomenal partners. Our architecture practice works with other developers, works with other construction companies. The new apartment tower that we did, we actually, our design practice was the architect of record, but we had a different architect that was brought in actually by our investors that helped early on, and then we partnered with a different contractor. So we are going to do what's best for the client. The client could be an investment group. The client could be a tenant of some sort. It's really important to us that we're doing what's best for the client. Our strategy with our affiliated businesses is to position them to be the best for the client, probably in specific categories. Not necessarily, it's difficult to say you're the best for the client in everything. And that's going to be an evolution. So we want to partner to the effect that we can provide the best product for the client.
Yeah.
So.
All right. And I know you're very busy. I've taken up a lot of your time. Is there anything we haven't covered yet that you wish we had?
Oh gosh.
I could go for 2 more hours.
Nothing comes immediate to mind, but this has been I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm excited to get back into 75 hard. Come January, we'll figure out how to make that happen. And this has been great. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. We'll do a follow-up in a year or so.
That sounds great.
All right.
Thanks,
Will.
Cool. Thank you.